Hello and welcome to our special broadcast, The Road to GST. I'm Shereen Bhan. Remember, the two-day GST Council meeting has concluded. We are now getting to hear from various state finance ministers. The issue of dual control continues to be a contentious one, and that wasn't taken up at the meeting today in its entirety. The IGST bill was taken up, but the portions that involved the issue of dual control were obviously not addressed. So compensation, as I pointed out this morning, the compensation bill was taken up by the GST Council, and that has been finalized and cleared. We'll get you more reactions in just a bit, but listen in to what state finance ministers have to say about the GST Council's meetings and what has transpired.
GST implementation होने के बाद जो नुकसान पहुंचता है वो नुकसान कैसा करना आज डिसाइड हो गया। कुछ सेस लगा के 5 साल तक
जी सर
जो राज्य सरकार को जो नुकसान पहुंचता है वो कंपनसेशन जरूर करने के लिए रखा है।
So what do you think, have states changed their mindset on dual control, or is it still that 1.5 crore threshold के नीचे दोनों goods and services is what states are demanding?
I don't know why they are insisting. 7% जो टैक्स
Yes,
90% डीलर से आता है,
very true.
वो काम करना बेकार है।
Okay.
7% जो 10% डीलर्स है वो 90% टैक्स दे रहा है। उसके ऊपर थोड़ा ध्यान रखे तो ज़्यादा इनकम आता, आगे बढ़ने का रहता। जो लोकल जो सिचुएशन रहता वो राज्य सरकार के पास रहता, जो राज्य सरकार का नूक एंड कॉर्नर में ऑफिसर्स रहता और संबंध भी रहता। इफेक्टिव इम्प्लीमेंटेशन होना बोल तो 1.5 के अंदर जो राज्य सरकार को जिम्मेदारी देना अच्छा है।
आज कंपनसेशन एक्ट पे काफ़ी चर्चा हुई और एक जनरल सहमति बनी कंपनसेशन एक्ट पे। 14% की फिगर तो पहले ही तय हुई थी।
Very true, sir.
और धक्का धुक्की
नहीं sir. No. So what happened today, sir?
First I'll speak in English, then I'll
Yeah.
First of all, today certain technical and procedural issues were cleared, but the big issues are yet to be resolved. For example, IGST, interstate trade, the fact that states have
the issue of dual control or
exporting something, importing something, even their state GST will be deducted in terms of input tax credit.
Very true, sir.
So that issue has not been discussed today, and we hope to have intense and appropriate discussion in January. Second big issue is, of course, dual control. As you know, the states are very clear with a unanimous decision of the empowered committee that below 1.5 crores, the small saloon person or beauty parlor lady, you cannot have dual control, center and state both getting after them. That matter also has not been discussed today. Among other big issues, many issues have to be re-brought to the GST. For example, on compensation. There were 3 days of discussions earlier on compensation.
Yeah.
At that time, the parameters were that there was no demonetization. And it was felt that a few states who have big tax base would perhaps not be able to reach 14% growth in taxes and therefore will need compensation. Now in the new environment, many more states across political parties feel that they will all need compensation. The middle level states who thought perhaps they will achieve 14% growth, now they feel that 30 to 40% revenue will decline in the third quarter. And fourth quarter may be as bad, if not worse. So earlier formulation without demonetization environment was that 55,000 crores perhaps would be necessary to compensate states as per the constitutional amendment as a guarantee, and that will come essentially from cesses. And we were able to even define the kind of cess that would be available primarily on demerit goods and luxury goods, and there's an environmental cess which the center gets independently, put together 55,000 crores in the kitty,
Very true.
which will go towards compensation. That was the atmospherics when these 3 days of discussions took place.
Right.
Today, atmosphere is completely changed. Almost all states, if not all states.
Well, that's the West Bengal Finance Minister and the head of the State Empowered Panel. But let's listen into the Finance Minister, Arun Jaitley.
We've just completed the 7th meeting of the GST Council. It was spread over 2 days, yesterday and today. And the carryover agenda from the last meeting was the approval of the draft legislations which are to be passed. Now, the Constitution Amendment mandates that both the Central Parliament and the state legislatures will approve the drafts which are recommended by the GST Council. So effectively, the Council is the drafting body because the Council comprising of the states and the centre, together there is a pooled sovereignty where whatever is approved by the Council then goes to the respective legislative bodies for approval. And therefore, it is extremely important that the drafting body whose recommendations are final applies itself. So for the last 2-3 days we've been of the meetings, the last meeting and the present one, the 4th, 5th and the 6th, the 5th, 6th and the 7th meeting, we've been concentrating on these drafts. So the primary draft of CGST and the SGST law, comprising of 197 provisions and 5 schedules, has been approved. There were some portions which were left out on which either some representation was made by a state government or we could not reach a consensus. So today morning we went into each one of those issues and many of those issues have been sorted out. And now with regard to the draft, only a few issues remain. Only those blanks are there which relates to dual control and cross-empowerment. Subject to that, the rest of the draft has been approved, but it will still be required that since changes are made in the meeting, the language has to be given a legal shape. And therefore, the legally vetted copy of the draft will be circulated to all the states. Now, the CGST and the SGST drafts are to be approved, the CGST by the Parliament and the SGST by all the state legislatures. These two laws will be a mirror image of each other. So that's one important step which we have completed. A significant headway has been made. Thereafter, we had to go into this whole issue of the compensation law. Now, on the compensation law, it is clear that the states will be compensated to the extent of 100% of loss which is directly attributable to GST implementation for a period of 5 years. And therefore, we had already spent 2 or 3 days discussing the compensation package earlier. Now, in terms of what we had discussed earlier, to give it an implementation shape, the compensation law is to be approved only by the Central Parliament. So the basic draft of that has been approved. Now, there was one clause in particular with regard to the source of the compensation fund, which language will be redrafted, and the legally vetted language will be placed before the next meeting of the Council. So that once those legally vetted drafts are approved in both the cases and a consensus is reached on that language, then we can put this law also behind us. That leaves us with a very important work of the IGST law and the cross-empowerment. Now, the two principal issues involved in the IGST law, one is relating to the definition of the territory of the state itself. It's a matter of constitutional interpretation. We'll have to discuss this and reach a decision. The second, whether the IGST powers under the Act are with the central government, or can those powers be shared? This is the second issue. And this is directly linked to the issue of how the division of authority for the implementation of the GST is to take place between the assessing machinery of the center and the state, which is the cross-empowerment and the dual authority issue. So these two issues will now be taken together. So if you were to ask me what are the principal items which are now residuary items left, the main item is of course the IGST and the dual empowerment issue. The secondary is the legally vetted language, which will be placed in the next meeting. And for this purpose, we'll be again meeting for 2 full days on the 3rd and the 4th of January for this purpose. And of course, there is the other parallel exercise, which will be the rates committee, which will consequently be working on the rates itself. Since that's also within the domain of the council, once we are able to do this entire work, then the recommendation of the rates committee will come up before the future meeting of the council itself. So on the next meeting, this key issue of IGST and dual control will come up before the council.
So when will these laws be taken up in the parliament? By next session can we expect?
You see, first of all, let the council has to approve the legally vetted language. And after that, whenever the parliament and the state assemblies move, the council will decide that they are now ripe for being placed before the legislative bodies.
So these laws will be finalized in the winter session itself. The industry says that it will require some 3-4 months once these laws turn into rules and acts. So what will be the consequent impact on the timeline?
You see, that we will decide once we've crossed all bridges. I'm not going to bind myself with anything. Our effort is to do it as quickly as possible. And I think we are making a reasonable headway.
सर ड्यूअल कंट्रोल में अब क्या बड़ा इशू क्या अभी उनका स्टेट्स की तरफ से क्या उठाया जा रहा है?
देखिए, आज तो कोई इशू नहीं उठा, क्योंकि आज पिछली मीटिंग में और आज की मीटिंग में तो हम लेजिस्लेशंस पे ही वर्क कर रहे थे। स्वाभाविक है कि जो इशू है कि जो ऑडिट करने का अधिकार है, जो ऑडिट केसेस आएंगे, उस अधिकार का प्रयोग राज्य और केंद्र के बीच में किस प्रकार से होगा, और उसके पीछे उद्देश्य है कि दोनों के पास एक असेसिंग मशीनरी है। और अभी हम उस स्टेज पे नहीं पहुंचे कि हम लोगों के पास एक जॉइंट ब्यूरोक्रेसी हो या एक फेडरल ब्यूरोक्रेसी हो। कानून एक है, लेकिन ब्यूरोक्रेसीज दो हैं, और इसलिए उसकी मैनेजमेंट के लिए, ऑडिटिंग मैनेजमेंट के लिए वो अधिकार क्षेत्र कैसे बटेंगे।
तो केंद्र के पास क्या इस बारे में कोई फॉर्मूला है जो इसको सुलझाने?
देखिए, ये एक डेलिबरेटिव तरीके से रिजॉल्व होता है, और जिस तरह मेरा अभी तक 7 मीटिंगों का अनुभव है, 2-2, 3-3 दिन की मीटिंगें भी हुई हैं, कि जीएसटी काउंसिल की मीटिंग पूरा दिन चलती है और एक एक विषय को लेकर घंटों घंटे बहस होती है, और बहस का स्तर भी बहुत अच्छा है। लोग तैयार होकर आते हैं, गहराई से बहस करते हैं, और वो उसमें फिर ऑल्टरनेटिव सुझाव आते हैं। और प्रायः उद्देश्य सबका ये है कि एक दूसरे को सुनने के बाद कोई वाया मीडिया जिसमें ज़्यादा तर्क और वजन हो, उसको हम लोग मान लेते हैं। अभी तक कोई भी निर्णय वोट से नहीं हुआ, कोई भी निर्णय अगर मैं कहूँ गिव एंड टेक से भी नहीं हुआ कि हम समझौता कर लेते हैं कि तुम 2 बात मेरी मान लो, मैं 2 बात तुम्हारी मान लेता हूँ, इस आधार पे भी नहीं हुआ। डिस्कशन के बाद जो बहस में से ज़्यादा रैशनल निकलता है, तर्क निकलता है, उस आधार पे फिर सब लोग मान जाते हैं कि यही उचित लगता है।
सर एक और सवाल है कि नोटबंदी के बाद ज़्यादातर राज्य सरकारें करें कि उन्हें मुआवजा ज़्यादा मिलना चाहिए, क्योंकि उनकी
देखिए, आप मुआवजा इस कानून और संविधान संशोधन में है, उसका ताल्लुक सिर्फ जीएसटी इम्प्लीमेंटेशन से है और किसी विषय से नहीं है। मतलब कल को अगर ज़्यादा पैसा रेवेन्यूज़ में आ जाता है और बैंकिंग सिस्टम में आ जाता है और रेवेन्यू ज़्यादा इकट्ठा हो जाता है तो उसका भी इस पे कोई असर नहीं।
Getting to also hear that probably some tweaking will be required in the law further to allow quicker payment to state governments in terms of
Yes, we have decided that.
2 months.
There was a debate between 1 month or 3 months, and finally we found that compensation will be payable to the states every 2 months.
Sir, are you hopeful that you will be able to roll out from 1st April?
Well, I am trying my best to do that.
But given the present trend, you should be able to meet the target if all goes well.
Well, I am trying my best, that's all. I don't want to hasten the process of discussion. I don't want to delay the process of implementation.
But your target remains 1st April?
Well, left to myself, I'd like to.
Just one more tiny question, sir. Also in terms of the revenue compensation, like we have already assumed that we are 14%. So, I mean, in terms of the compensation, so would that be a bit of a challenge for us? Because states will be sitting pretty because it's a constitutional commitment for the next 5 years. But looking at
No, I have no reason to believe that states will deliberately not collect their revenue. There is no reason to assume that. Every state will honestly try to collect as much revenue. Just for the sake of getting compensation, they can't hurt their own revenue collections. No state will ever try and do that. I don't think it's a fair comment of the states itself.
So this audit,
as far
which
as the
agency?
base-
Audit is which agency now? It's finally taken.
Sir, has there been any discussion about changing the base year for compensation 2015-16?
No.
Continues to be.
सर जीएसटी की इतनी मीटिंगें करनी पड़ रही हैं और डिमोनेटाइजेशन और ईवीडीटी भी दूसरे काम में लगे हुए हैं तो बजट प्रिपरेशन की टाइम मिल पा रहा है?
नहीं, हम बजट प्रिपरेशन भी चल रहा है और 3 और 4 तारीख की मीटिंग का जो दूसरा भाग होगा उसमें मैं स्टेट फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर्स के साथ बजट कंसल्टेशन भी करने वाला हूँ.
And is there a cap, sir, on compensation like 50,000 per year?
No, there is no cap.
And no cap. Do you fear, sir, that somewhere down the line, because of the demonetization?
We are living in a real world and politics is a part of that real world. But at the end of the day, one has to assume that elected representatives in center and state have a sense of responsibility. And so far, despite initial divergence of views, it all ends with convergence. That's been the experience, and I think that's one of the great advantages of deliberative democracy.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, that's the Finance Minister, Arun Jaitley. So as we'd reported, as far as the compensation clause itself is concerned, there has been some tweaking there. So instead of a quarterly payout, it will now be a 2-month or a bi-monthly payout to states. Also, as we pointed out, the issue of dual control will now be taken up on the 3rd and 4th, along with the IGST bills. And the legally vetted language will also be taken up when the GST Council meets on the 3rd and the 4th. The Finance Minister there saying he will not like to be tied down to a number, so saying that he's trying his best to try and ensure that 1st April is met. But I think it seems pretty clear now that 1st of April 2017 will be a daunting ask for the GST rollout. Joining us now, MS Mani of Deloitte and Prateek Jain, leader of indirect taxes at PwC. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us. Let me bring in a quick comment from you. And Mani, let me start by asking you, you just had the Finance Minister, and before that you had heard several of the state finance ministers. What did you make of the progress made so far and what we should expect on the 3rd and 4th?
Okay, Shereen, so my initial take would be that the fact that we are making progress is good. The fact that a lot of issues have been resolved based on what the Finance Minister said is excellent, because they seem to be going at it legislation-wise, which is the right way to do. And they also seem to be parking some of the contentious issues so that those can be discussed later. So from that point of view, it is very good that we are making progress. Also, the fact that they are meeting as early as January 3rd and 4th is really very good. So they would possibly be having 1 or 2 meetings before Parliament convenes for the budget session. And if the intention is to have the bills placed in the budget session, then it's very, very good. I would just say that the downside is that many people were expecting some kind of a date for the GST rollout because we are not getting any signals from the government accepting 1st April, which increasingly looks non-doable. So if there had been some kind of a date which was mentioned so that trade and business could start preparing, that would have been very, very nice, and that would have been a vote of confidence.
Yeah, that clearly wasn't forthcoming there from the finance minister, repeatedly saying that we're trying our best, we're making the efforts, but I will not be tied down to a number just yet. Prateek, what did you make of what the finance minister said? And really on the issue of dual control now, what should we realistically expect? Because if you saw what the state finance ministers had to say, we don't really, we haven't moved the needle much in terms of convergence on the issue of dual control, at least what we saw publicly being stated there.
Yes, I mean, I think, he's keeping all the cards to his chest. I mean, there is no discussion on what kind of different models central government has in mind for them to discuss with with states rather. But I would say that today the body language looked quite positive to me. I mean, body language was quite positive. The compensation has been agreed for, compensation law has been agreed, CGST laws have been finalized. And the fact that they're just meeting after a week or so, it seems that the state's resistance on the issue is somewhat diluting. That's a sense I'm getting. I'm quite hopeful that in the next meeting, they might be able to reach to a consensus on this.
If they do, and if we were to see this go through in the budget session itself, Prateek, even though we still have to get a sense of what the final rate structure will be, the Committee of Secretaries will have to submit their recommendations to the Council. That process is yet to take place. But do you believe that there is still a chance that April 1 will be doable?
No, there is an outside chance. I think, in terms of percentage, I won't put more than 10-15% chance of it happening from April 1. And finance ministers did indicate, when he said that I don't want to hasten process. So I think 3-4 months of delay looks very possible. As far as the rate of tax is concerned, that's fine. That doesn't need to be presented before the Parliament. That can happen through a schedule, through a notification later. So that doesn't need to be finalized. But if in the budget session they're able to get the laws approved, then at least the industry would be sure that it is going to come in next, few months.
In fact, we're just hearing from Dr. Amit Mitra, and let me bring in Hari into the conversation as well. Hari, Amit Mitra saying that a new date is in discussion for the rollout of the GST. Repeated questions being asked to the finance minister, is it 1st of April? Are we likely to miss 1st of April? And he was very clear he wasn't going to be tying himself down to a particular date. Amit Mitra now telling our reporter that a new date is in discussion for the rollout of the GST. So, do you think that if it's not April then, and the constitutional compulsion means that by September they need to roll it out, what could be the appropriate timeline?
Shereen, I don't think April is going to happen. It's pretty daunting, like you said. The chances of 1st July could be more realistic. I don't know whether they will push it till September, because that will make the whole situation a little more dicey. So the chances of July 1st looks more likely, though I don't think I have heard anything official from any of the
No, and there has been no official intimation. In fact, Amit Mitra saying that a new date is in discussion. In fact, he tells our reporter that asked the finance minister about the date that's been discussed. So he's not disclosing what was discussed at the council either.
No, they won't, because I don't think any of those people are going to make any statement on the revised date, unless they probably come to some conclusion on this entire dual empowerment. But what is interesting, what the finance minister said, and that gives you a sense of what could happen on 3rd and 4th, is that he said 2 things are going to be discussed on 3rd and 4th. And the progress on CGST and compensation was good. He said IGST, the entire definition of territory of the state, which is what I heard surprisingly today when I was in the Ministry of Finance. I have not got the hang of what they are meaning by the term territory. The second aspect which he said is that IGST as per constitutional today is only the center is empowered to collect. And he made a very important statement.
Hari, if you can just hold on. Hari, if you can just... Sure. If you can just hold on for 30 seconds, Hari. We've also got with us Mr. Pandya, the Education Minister of Tamil Nadu and representative of the state at the GST Council, and also with us Mr. Hasib Drabu, the Finance Minister from Jammu and Kashmir. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us. Mr. Pandya, let me start by asking you, sir. Dr. Mitra seems to have suggested to our reporter that a new rollout date for the GST is informally being discussed. The Finance Minister in his press conference, when repeatedly asked if 1st of April is doable, said efforts are being made, but I'm not going to tie myself down to a particular date. What has been the discussion on the possibility of a delayed or a deferred rollout beyond April 1?
I think there's no way we can catch the April 1 deadline. And in any case, Finance Minister has started talking about any date between April 1 and September 15th. 2017. So I see more of 1st of July as a likely possibility. But there are very substantial issues which are yet to be decided by the GST Council. One, of course, is the issue of IGST gross empowerment, and two is the gross empowerment with a horizontal model, which is what the states are wanting, while the centre has been wanting a vertical model where gross empowerment between centre and state happens both above and below the 1.5 crores. So these are two very, very critical issues. And of course, there are some other smaller issues like the compensation law, definition of...
Mr. Pandya, may I request you, sir, to hold on, because we've also got with us Mr. Drabu and Mr. Isaac. So I'll come back to you in just a second. Let me bring in Thomas Isaac as well. Mr. Isaac, thanks very much for joining us, sir. There has been progress that we've seen at the Council today with the SGST and the CGST laws being finalized, compensation being finalized as well. Dual control will now be taken up along with the IGST in the next meeting, sir. Has there been any convergence of any sort between the centre and the states on the issue of cross-empowerment, Mr. Isaac?
No, I didn't attend the meeting this today or yesterday, and therefore I don't know the details. But as far as I understand, dual control was not, empowerment was not taken up at all.
No, it was not taken up today.
Yeah. Then a new point of difference has cropped up. That is regarding compensation. We had 2 meetings discussing on compensation, and a formula was arrived at, despite the objection from many states that it is not correct to levy a surcharge on GST. In fact, we had accused that Centre had kept the upper rate structure at 28% at a relatively low level to have a scope for a surcharge on it. Well, anyway, we agreed. Then 4 items there would be surcharge. But now it happens that Centre wants to have this right to notify additional duty on all commodities and services. This is preposterous. And states didn't agree with it. There was no consensus on this, though a new point of difference has come up.
Okay. Mr. Drabu, Mr. Isaac, just hold on for 1 second, sir, because you were not at the meeting today. So if I could just bring in Mr. Hasib Drabu and Mr. Pandya, since they were at the meeting. Mr. Drabu, can you explain to us this point that Mr. Isaac is making, sir, about the centre now saying that it wants to have the right to notify additional duties on all services, sir, beyond what was earlier agreed on, and Mr. Isaac also saying that there are some new points of differences on the issue of compensation, but the Finance Minister seemed to suggest that the compensation matter was pretty much finalized today.
Well, in response to what Isaac has been saying, it's a matter of looking at it glass full or half empty or half full. I would go along with the fact that I thought the compensation issue was solved today, subject to one particular clause being drafted in terms of language, which the Tamil Nadu minister had raised in terms of defining the compensation fund. As we understood it, compensation was decided long back. The only thing today that was raised by states was what if the need for compensation is more than 55,000 crores, which is the estimated amount which will come out of the cess that we had decided earlier. At which point of time, I think that the central government also put this point forward, that is for the GST Council to decide, because As per the Constitution of India, it is the Parliament shall, on recommendation of the GST Council. So shall, on recommendation of the GST Council, let the GST Council recommend. The GST Council need not recommend an additional duty. That was one of the thoughts that was floated around. I proposed a revolving fund and so on and so forth. There's different ideas being tossed, but those are really matters of procedures, that will you do it through this route or that. The larger point which was raised was also, should you restrict it to cess? I think that was also agreed upon. Cess and other such revenues that may happen. So, that is the key point, that let us not look at compensation as being funded entirely from the cess. I completely agree with Isaac in the sense that using cess as a model to finance compensation is not the best option. I've said this before also. It's not desirable, but that time, given the situation, we all agreed upon it. Now, to reopen those issues, I don't think is fair or ethical. But the only point that remains now is that the line would be there in terms of cess and other such revenues, so you can look at others, which it's not for centre to decide, but for the GST Council to decide. I think at some point, the states must also take responsibility for having shared sovereignty. So we need to be a part of those decisions. It's not for centre to decide, but for the GST Council, in which case GST Council may choose to ask for a loan from the banking segment or increase in some other thing, and then extend the period from 5 years to 6 years so that we can recoup it. If it's seen, if the compensation fund is seen as a revolving fund, then these options open up. So to my mind, I think it's the compensation issue is resolved. As regards empowerment, yes, that's a critical issue. Key issue was not discussed. We didn't have time. That will come up for discussion 3rd and 4th.
Mr. Pandirajan, since Mr. Drabu said that you had raised this issue of the drafting concern on, on defining the fund as far as compensation itself is concerned, some of the questions that were asked, and as Mr. Drabu pointed out, what if the need is higher than 55,000 crores? We just had Dr. Amit Mitra saying that demonetization wasn't factored in when the compensation clause was arrived at, and what if some states can't actually do 14% in terms of revenue? What then happens to compensation? So, how real is this possibility that we will actually see the council approve additional levies beyond the cess which was already now factored in?
Yeah, listen, the only point I was raising was that the onus of responsibility for compensating the state governments rests with the central government, which they're not denying. Constitutional amendment defines that. But the GST Council has to recommend the course of action in order to pay the compensation. Now, the compensation fund, the creation of the cess for the specific luxury goods and syntax and everything, all that is supposed to go into the compensation fund. Now, the question is if in case the compensation goes beyond 55,000 crores, which now seems a very live possibility. The demonetization base.
You're saying it is a very live possibility that compensation will exceed 55,000 crores?
Good chance, especially if the revenues are falling like it has been in the last November and December. I mean, everybody has experienced a fall in their tax revenues. So there is a good chance, in which case, there has to be a way found out. And I don't want the GST Council to be constrained to only go with the cess, either increasing the cess or bringing in more products into the cess, by which time the compensation would be due. And there will be a delay necessarily if the GST Council is meet and do things. I basically said, look, don't confine the options for GST Council by saying the compensation will be only paid through the cess. So that is where now it is at. And broadly, I think there is an agreement.
So has there been convergence on if it's not just, if it does exceed 55,000 crore rupees? Mr. Drabu was suggesting that he suggested a revolving fund. What should we realistically expect now beyond the cess?
So there is I don't think there's anyone mistakenly, surely is not going back on the constitutional commitment, which clearly the onus is also with the central government. But there is a recommendation to be made by the GST Council, which the Parliament has to pass. So that's the model. So for that, there is an agreement that they will not tie the hands of the GST Council to work only with the set model. So that now it's only a question of writing the thing in a legally acceptable manner and reflecting the sense of the House. which I think will happen in the next meeting. So to my mind, and as Dr. Prabhu said, it is a convergence which has been arrived at. It's only a formalizing the convergence in legal terms. But the key thing is the cross-empowerment and the keeping. Mind you, the last 2 days, there have been many things which appear very small, but when you explode, there are lots of positions people were taking, and convergences need to be found in every step. We cleared literally 97 clauses today on CGST bill, so it's not an easy thing. Ranging from the authority to be vested for prosecution, what level the authority gets vested, should we prosecute, what kind of offences we prosecute, what constitutes a criminal act, what doesn't constitute a criminal act, all these elements have to be worked through, and we work through them. So I think we worked in a spirit of give and take, and they were conscious reviews, and it's not divided on party lines. By and large, people worked beyond party lines. There were times when Gujarat and Rajasthan and some of the BJP states were very vehemently opposed to some of the clauses, and there are times when West Bengal and Tamil Nadu were quite pro some of the clauses which happened. So
may I, Mr. Pandirajan, ask you, sir, specifically, and I'd like to put this question to you, Mr. Drabu and Mr. Isaac. Is there an estimate that was discussed? If it's beyond 55,000 crores, where could this number head? Are we talking about 70,000 crores? Could it be higher? Has there been some estimate of what the compensation requirement could in fact be if the assumption on the 14% revenue goes awry? Mr. Pandirajan?
Yeah, I don't think, there's no going back on 14%. There is a convergence. I think it's only a question of finding funds. If it goes beyond the 55,000, it could be a loan which will generate a structural adjustment loan, as they call it. It could be from the international multilateral agencies. It could, they've ruled out the option of tapping into the fund, the Consolidated Fund of India, which basically means you draw it from the income tax and other taxes, which the central government still has the authority to levy. So that they've been very reluctant to. So I see the option only as taking a loan into this fund, and as Dr. Prabhu said, to have a revolving fund. This whole compensation fund is a revolving fund from where you keep tapping and we keep putting in, which independently can also raise funds, raise
Dr. Drabu,
loan for more.
Let me just take that point across to Dr. Drabu. Dr. Drabu, this is what I think the markets are going to be looking at very closely, sir, because the assumption was that the issue of compensation had been addressed with 55,000 crore rupees as the number by way of cess as well as the clean energy cess. Can you share some more details with us on what the estimate now is? Because we're hearing numbers of perhaps the compensation needs going as high as 70,000 or perhaps even higher than that. Was there any discussion on a possible number, sir, at the GST Council? And if you can share more details on the revolving fund idea that you floated that seems to have found favor.
Look, I don't think we got any estimate. I mean, it's not like 70,000. It can be anybody's guess. And right now it's a pie in the sky. You really don't know how things will pan out. It will also depend on at what point one forces the GST. I have a slightly different take on this whole issue of demonetization, having not been there, which Dr. Mitra talks about. GST has nothing to do with that. And I have kept on saying in the forum that these compensation is an open-ended compensation. I mean, states can suffer a natural calamity which brings down revenues, it's still get compensated. A state may decide to become a rogue state and not do a performance collection of taxes, you'll still get compensated. So it's a fairly, I think it's more of an insurance than a compensation. But having said that, I mean, I think the possible going forward, whatever today you may say that, the GDP will grow much slower and hence taxes will grow slower. Please recognize the fact that I don't see in the past at any point of time states having recorded 14% growth in tax revenues. So it's like the two are linked. But having said that, if there is need, then the GST Council can look at options. One of the options is that instead of making it 5 years, we can look at a 6-year compensation. So that because you also recognize the fact that every year we expect, and that's the whole logic of GST, we expect the need for compensation to decline. So in year 4, year 5, it may not be as high as year 1 and year 2. So if you give that flexibility, that don't do 5 years, do 6 years compensation, then additional outflows that are coming in for the first 5 years can get sorted out in year 6. We are home and dry. So it's not that difficult an issue. Number 2, we can look at a facility, which is a facility from sources outside of Consolidated Fund of India, which the GST Council will recommend, which will be guaranteed by the central government, and eventually pay off from year 6, year 7 revenues, which surplus will be there because there's a provision that if there is surplus, it will be shared between the center and the states. Then one could kind of think. I think one of the basic points is that we are moving towards a much more federal system, that where states have to take responsibility for some decision making. And it's not, while technically, yes, Parliament does kind of make the right thing. GST Council, where states are overwhelmingly present, has to make the recommendation. My idea was also revolving fund is that don't make it fixed into the consolidated fund. You can place it wherever you want. The real issue is that you must be able to recoup that fund. That whole is so that some of the stuff keeps coming in and going out. So you earmark a certain fund, and you may find that, including, for instance, states had lots of apprehensions that do you want to compensate us monthly or bi-monthly or 6 monthly. I moved to the idea of advance payment.
And I believe now it's bi-monthly. I believe they've agreed on a bi-monthly payout now.
It's a bi-monthly payout. You can even look at subsequently in a year's time, perhaps looking at advanced drawals if liquidity position doesn't improve. You also have the window of WMA being, kind of calibrated to the new tax regime, because earlier you had a different tax regime. Inflows and outflows, which was the gap which WMA is supposed to meet, will now change because you will have a different buoyancy to your taxes. So once that happens, you can conceivably for the next 5 years tinker around with the WMA, recalibrate it to the needs of the states so that there are no liquidity problems. I don't think as...
Mr. Dabu, I think, what people will want clarity on, sir, and anyway, when the cess announcement had come in, that hadn't gone down particularly well with the street. Now, what people will want clarity on is, as of now, our understanding is that the cess will be applicable only on a certain limited number of items. If my memory serves me right, it's between 5 and 8. I think the fear now is that will more, products or services be added on as far as this under the cess bracket itself is concerned, and this business of other surcharges, sir, I think, if you can clarify on that as well, and the real possibility of that.
I'm certainly not in favor of other surcharges, and I think there was a general consensus that centre should not do that, which is when the GST Council brought in, which is why we are emphasizing the need for going outside the tax to compensate. I think it was a bad idea to use cess. I've said that earlier also, but because you have no option, centre was constrained for its funds, it was used. But having said that, I think we have to look outside the tax kind of net to fund the additional compensation. The ideal preference would be to do that, and I don't think that the centre would be allowed by the GST Council to get in for additional duties and levies or increase the surcharge and cesses. I think that's very, very clear. If I have a sense of the House, then that will not happen. So if that gives any comfort to the market, then I think they should take it that it's not going to be driven by cess. It won't be driven by cess and surcharges. If at all there is need for additional compensation, which I also feel that there may be need for some additional funding, it will come through a facility outside of the tax things rather than putting it on, because one of the things is that you do want to lower the tax rates. The effective rates have to come down, and you would actually impair the GST architecture if you start tampering around with surcharges and cesses. So that will be the last option that will be explored, and I don't think the GST Council, from what I have seen of the GST Council, as the Tamil Nadu minister was also saying, that it was beyond party lines and the general, genuine, good contribution being made, a lot of experience and wisdom being put in, and some states do have a point of view, and one has to see that. I would imagine, if I have a sense of the House, that you will not get into surcharges and cesses and other things. You will meet the compensation needs from sources outside of that, and I prefer a facility which can be then sorted out in year 6 or year 7.
All right. A final word from you, Mr. Isaac. We just heard from both Mr. Pandeyarajan as well as Haseeb Drabu. They seem to have a slightly different take on the way that this compensation issue has been addressed at the council meeting yesterday and today, but perhaps that's because you were not part of the meeting as well, sir. But do you get comfort from what you've heard from the two gentlemen who were actually part of the meeting today?
Well, there is no going back from a decision that has already been made in the council. When the issue of compensation came on, there were two options. One was the VAT way. that is, VAT compensation was not mobilized through an additional duty on that, but from the central government's other revenues. Now, if that is not possible, the second option was cess on the on GST. Well, there was stiff opposition to that, and finally a compromise was worked out that there will be cess on 4 commodities. And that was the agreement. That agreement we are willing to go by. But now, for whatever reasons, whether it was because 55,000 crores rupees are not sufficient or whatever, Centre wants to have additional cess, that's what I understand, I mean that in the meeting, on more commodities and services, which is not acceptable. That's what we are objecting to. Let there be another facility which will borrow and provide the money, or Centre can make a provision from its general revenue to compensate the state. So it cannot be that open-ended increase or cess on GST to finance the compensation. Now, if that is not the decision made in the council, fine, that's fine with me. But if that is the decision, well, we have objection.
Right, gentlemen, we will leave it there and reconnect with you on the 3rd and 4th of January. That is when the GST Council will reconvene to take up the contentious issue of dual control and the IGST bill, which were not taken up today. In fact, as Mr. Pandya said, 97 clauses were cleared today. The CGST and the SGST bills were finalized. Let me bring in our tax experts now. Mani, Prateek Jain, Hari and Sachin Menon with us. Mani, your first take on what you've heard so far. So clearly, the first headline, there is likely to be an additional requirement from the earlier approved figure of 55,000 crores as far as the compensation is concerned. The worry is that the centre seems to be pushing perhaps additional levies and surcharges, but the comfort coming in there from Mr. Drabu, Mr. Pandya suggesting that we need to look outside of the tax net, outside of the Consolidated Fund of India to try and meet that gap that may arise on compensation.
Okay. Shereen, the way I look at it, for me, the biggest headline in the last 1 hour or so has been the fact that we seem to be decisively headed towards GST. And some of the discussions that we have been hearing in the recent past, possibly in the last 2 months, which appear to suggest that GST may or may not, be there, clearly seem to be misplaced. So based on all that we have been hearing for the last 1 hour or so, including what the FM said, it does seem that we are certainly headed for GST, and it's just a question of is it going to be 1st of April or 1st of July or any other date. Now, if that be so, then possibly what we need to bear in mind is that the issue of compensation which is being discussed, similar to many other issues which have already been discussed and debated, could possibly also get settled in the first week of January when the GST Council meets. So I would not say that that is an issue which would become a showstopper. If there are some issues which need to be discussed before the GST law is introduced, it may be very good for them to debate it and come to a conclusion. And as I said earlier, even if they agree in first week of January and they introduce the bill in the budget session of Parliament, to me that's making very good progress as far as GST is concerned.
Yes. Absolutely. Let me bring in a quick word from Prateek as well. Prateek, that's Mani's takeaway, that there is progress. And I think if you heard what Mr. Pandya as well as Mr. Drabu had to say, it seemed like even on, while there continue to be some contentious issues, but the council is moving forward to address the issues that have yet to be finalized and making significant progress. But it seems now, from what we've heard, that perhaps 1st of July is being seen as a real possibility for the rollout.
No, absolutely. So I think, as I said, I think the whole body language seemed positive. What we heard from the J&K Finance Minister as well as Tamil Nadu Minister and earlier Delhi, Finance Minister and Deputy Chief Minister. So I think we have made good progress. I don't understand this whole debate on compensation, frankly. I think Mr. Jaitley clearly said that there is no cap of 50,000 crores. Any additional revenue which is required for compensation, clearly is central government's responsibility. And I agree with the thought that cess should not be the only way and means for the central government to get these funds. And certainly, and this is one concern that I had from what I heard from Kerala Finance Minister, that the central government wants to expand this cess on services and many other products as well. And right from the day one, when this cess was proposed, we had raised this concern that once cess gets into the system, then you would just keep expanding it. So one just hopes that this is not the line in which the discussion goes, in the next meeting. But other than that, I think this compensation issue has been, settled. And now, of course, the only issue which remains is the dual control issue, which hopefully they will resolve when they meet on 3rd and 4th of January.
Well, gentlemen, thanks very much for staying on with us and taking us through the developments of the day. That's the road to GST. It's looking less uncertain. The next meeting is on the 3rd and 4th. Significant progress has been made today. And even on the issue of compensation, where if there were to be a need for the compensation needs to be beyond 55,000 crore rupees, which is what was agreed on earlier, then as you heard from the state finance ministers, the idea or the ideal way for that would be to try and find it outside of the tax net, which means there shouldn't be an additional surcharge, additional levies, and that seems to be the sense as far as the GST Council is concerned, and the final decision will rest with the GST Council. We'll have to take a break, but when we return, it's the battle between Nasliwadi and the Tatas. It's getting uglier. That and more when we get back.